The blood-soaked letter trembled in Nora Blackburn's scarred hands. As she read the words that would forever change her life, her husband and young son were dead, murdered by bandits on their way back from Silver City. The shabby room at Winnemucca's only boarding house blurred through her tears as she collapsed onto the thin mattress, her entire world shattering into irretrievable pieces. It was 1876 in Nevada Territory, and Nora had already endured more than most women twice her 23 years. The scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, a permanent reminder of the stagecoach accident that had claimed her parents 3 years prior, was only the most visible of her wounds. "Poor thing," whispered Mrs. Hollies, the boarding house owner, to another tenant in the hallway. "First that awful accident leaves her face like that, now losing her family. Some folks are just born to heartache, too damaged for this world, I reckon. Who could ever love someone so?" "Broken." Nora stiffened at the words that filtered through the thin walls. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the truth stung nonetheless. With trembling fingers, she folded the letter and tucked it away. There was nothing left for her in Winnemucca, no family, no prospects, nothing but pitying glances and whispers that ceased whenever she entered a room. 3 months later, Nora stood on the dusty platform of Silverwater Station, 90 miles east of Winnemucca. Her once fine dress hung loosely on her frame, testament to the weight grief had stolen from her. A small carpetbag contained all her worldly possessions, and a piece of paper clutched in her hand bore the address of the only person who might help her late husband's cousin, who owned a small ranch outside town. "Miss, you need assistance with that bag." The station master approached, his expression darkening slightly as she turned, revealing the jagged scar that marred her otherwise delicate features. "No, thank you." Nora pulled her bonnet lower, a practiced movement to shield her face from view. "Could you direct me to the Morgan property?" "I believe it's some distance from town." The station master's brows rose. "Old Jim Morgan's place, about 5 miles north, not much out there these days since the fever took him last winter." Nora's heart sank. "Jim Morgan is dead?" "Yes, madam. His nephew's running the place now. Came from Texas, I believe. Decent sort, keeps to himself mostly." With no other options, Nora hired a wagon to take her to the Morgan Ranch. The journey stretched across arid landscapes dotted with sagebrush and lonely outcroppings of rock. By the time they approached the modest homestead, the afternoon sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the weathered barn and small main house. As the wagon rattled to a stop in front of the house, Nora noticed a tall figure emerging from the barn, leading a magnificent chestnut horse. The man paused, shielding his eyes against the setting sun as he studied the unexpected visitors. "That's Archer Whitfield," the driver informed her. "Morgan's nephew." Archer approached with long, purposeful strides. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, worn denims, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. "Something I can help you with." His voice was deep but not unfriendly, tinged with the faintest hint of a Texas drawl. Nora stepped down from the wagon with as much dignity as she could muster, keeping her face partially turned away. "Mr. Whitfield, my name is Nora Blackburn. Your Uncle Jim was my husband's cousin. I've recently been widowed, and had hoped he might offer temporary lodging while Her voice caught. Archer stepped closer, removing his hat to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that assessed her with quiet intensity. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sandy brown hair and the beginning of lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than not, though he wasn't smiling now. "I'm sorry to hear about your husband, Mrs. Blackburn," he said. "And I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey. Uncle Jim passed last winter, so I've just learned." Nora swallowed hard. "I apologize for the intrusion. If you could direct me to a boarding house in town—" "There isn't one," Archer interrupted, his gaze moving past her to the wagon driver who was already unloading her carpet bag. "Jenkins, you heading back to town tonight?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Whitfield. Got deliveries in the morning." Archer turned back to Nora, studying her openly now. She resisted the urge to adjust her bonnet, to hide the scar she knew he must be staring at. Instead, she forced herself to meet his gaze directly, refusing to show weakness. Something flickered in his eyes, not the revulsion or pity she'd come to expect, but something she couldn't quite define. "Respect, perhaps. It'll be dark soon," he said finally. "The ranch house has plenty of room. You're welcome to stay the night and we can figure things out in the morning." Relief flooded through Nora. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition," he said simply. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Diaz, lives in the back cottage with her husband. She'll be glad for female company. I imagine you could use a hot meal and rest after your journey." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hooves drew their attention. A rider appeared on the horizon, pushing his horse hard. Even at a distance, the tension in his posture was evident. Archer frowned. "Something's wrong." He turned to Nora. "The house is unlocked." "Make yourself comfortable. I need to see what this is about." The rider, a young ranch hand barely out of his teens, reined his lathered horse to a stop. "Mr. Whitfield, rustlers hit the north pasture. They've driven off at least 20 head, maybe more. Miguel's been shot." Archer's expression hardened. "How bad?" "Shoulder wound. Mrs. Diaz is tending to him at the line shack. Round up whoever's available. I'll meet you at the north boundary in 20 minutes. Archer turned back to Nora, conflict evident in his expression. "Go," she said firmly. "I'll be fine." With a nod of gratitude, he swung onto his chestnut horse without bothering with a saddle and galloped away, the ranch hand following close behind. Left alone, Nora paid the wagon driver and carried her bag to the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, worn but good quality furniture, and shelves lined with books. To her surprise, the space was clean and orderly, lacking the bachelor squalor she had half expected. In the kitchen, she found a pot of stew simmering on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. A note in a feminine hand indicated that Mrs. Diaz had prepared dinner before leaving to tend to the injured ranch hand. Grateful but too anxious to eat, Nora busied herself making coffee, finding strange comfort in this mundane task. As darkness fell, she lit lamps and settled into a chair near the window, watching the empty yard for any sign of returning riders. The isolation of the ranch struck her forcefully. In Winnemucca, even with her grief and loneliness, there had been the constant sounds of the town voices, wagon wheels, the distant whistle of trains. Here, the silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional cry of a night bird or the creaking of the house as it settled. It was nearly midnight when she heard horses approaching. Peering through the window, she saw Archer dismounting, his movements betraying exhaustion. Two other riders continued past the house toward what she assumed were the bunkhouses. Archer entered quietly, stopping short when he saw her still awake. "You should have gone to bed, Mrs. Blackburn." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, turning to face him fully for the first time, making no attempt to hide her scar. "Is your ranch hand Miguel? Will he recover?" Archer nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "The bullet passed clean through. He's young and strong. Mrs. Diaz is staying with him tonight." He moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee before sinking into a chair opposite her. We recovered most of the cattle, but the rustlers got away. This happens often, too often lately. He took a long drink of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. His gaze lingered on her scar, but unlike so many others, he didn't quickly look away in discomfort. That must have been a bad accident. The directness of his comment startled her. Stagecoach overturned 3 years ago. My parents were killed instantly. I was luckier. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Lucky enough to be sitting here, he observed quietly. Many wouldn't have survived at all. Something in his tone, the simple acknowledgement without pity, loosened a knot inside her. Most days I'm grateful, others. She shrugged. People see the scar first. Everything else about me becomes secondary. Archer set down his cup, leaning forward slightly. People are fools, Mrs. Blackburn. A scar is just evidence you were stronger than whatever tried to kill you. The words, spoken matter-of-factly without a trace of sentimentality, caught her off guard. Before she could respond, he stood. There's a bedroom down the hall, first door on the right. Clean linens on the bed. We can talk more in the morning about your plans. He hesitated. I'm sorry about your husband, and that you came all this way to find Jim gone. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Whitfield. Archer, he corrected. We don't stand on formality out here. Nora, then, she replied, offering a small smile. He nodded, something warming in his gaze before he bid her good night and disappeared down the hallway to his own room. In the quiet of the borrowed bedroom, Nora unpacked her few belongings, including a daguerreotype of her husband Robert and their son James. Their smiling faces brought fresh pain, but also a strange new feeling, a tiny spark of something she thought had died with them. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the possibility of hope. Morning brought the rich aroma of coffee and the sound of voices from the kitchen. Nora dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a modest navy blue that had seen better days, but was still presentable, and pinned her dark hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. In the kitchen, she found Archer in conversation with a plump, middle-aged Mexican woman who was efficiently preparing breakfast. "Ah, there you are," Archer said, rising from his seat. "Mrs. Blackburn, this is Elena Diaz, the true master of this household." Elena wiped her hands on her apron and greeted Nora warmly, her brown eyes kind but observant. "Welcome to Silverwater, Senora. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Nora said, touched by the genuine welcome. "How is Miguel this morning?" "He rests comfortably. My husband Carlos will stay with him today." Elena guided her to a chair. "You must eat. You are too thin." Under Elena's watchful eye, Nora found herself eating more than she had in months: fresh eggs, biscuits with honey, strong coffee. Archer ate with the healthy appetite of a man who worked hard, occasionally contributing to Elena's steady stream of conversation about the ranch and the surrounding community. When Elena left to take food to her husband and the injured ranch hand, a momentary silence fell between Nora and Archer. "I should return to Winnemucca today," Nora said finally. "I've imposed enough." Archer leaned back in his chair, considering her. "What awaits you there?" The blunt question caught her off guard. Nothing specific. I have a room at the boarding house." "Perhaps I can find work as a seamstress or—" "Stay," Archer interrupted. At her surprised look, he continued, "Elena could use help with the house. It's too much for her alone, especially with her tending to Miguel now. The position comes with room, board, and wages." Nora stared at him, searching for pity in his offer and finding none. "You don't know me, Mr. Whitfield Archer. I could be anyone." A slight smile curved his mouth. "You're Robert Blackburn's widow. That's good enough for me. Uncle Jim spoke highly of your husband in his letters." "You've read Jim's letters about Robert." "Everyone. Jim didn't have children of his own. He considered your husband like a nephew. Archer's expression softened. He would have wanted me to help you. Nora looked down at her hands, considering. The prospect of returning to Winnemucca with its pitying glances and whispers held no appeal. Here, at least, she might be useful. A trial period, then, she said finally. 2 weeks. If it doesn't work out, I'll return to Winnemucca. Fair enough. Archer stood, donning his hat. I need to check on the herd. Alina will show you around. After he left, Alina returned, pleased to learn Nora would be staying. That man, she said, shaking her head fondly. He works too hard since he came here. 8 months and not 1 day of rest. The ranch was nearly lost when Senor Morgan died. Archer saved it. How did he manage that? Nora asked, helping Alina clear the breakfast dishes. He sold his own property in Texas, paid off the debts, rebuilt the herds. Alina crossed herself. A good man, but lonely, I think, like you. Nora wanted to deny the observation but couldn't. Instead, she changed the subject. Show me what needs to be done around the house, please. I want to earn my keep. The next days settled into a rhythm. Nora worked alongside Alina, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes for Archer and the handful of ranch hands. The physical labor was a balm, leaving her too tired for the nightmares that had plagued her since receiving news of her family's deaths. She began to eat regularly again, and the constant ache in her chest eased fractionally. Archer remained a puzzle. He was unfailingly polite, even kind in his quiet way, but maintained a certain reserve. In the evenings, he often sat reading by the fire, occasionally asking about her day or sharing news about the ranch. Once, she caught him watching her as she mended one of his shirts, his expression unreadable before he returned to his book. A week into her stay, Nora was hanging laundry in the yard when 3 riders approached. From their fine clothes and the quality of their horses, they were clearly not ranch hands or drovers. Archer emerged from the barn to meet them, his stance wary. Whitfield, called the lead rider, a corpulent man with a florid face partially hidden behind an impressive mustache. Been meaning to pay you a proper visit. Judge Halsey, Archer acknowledged with a nod. What brings you out this way? Business proposition. The judge dismounted with effort, handing his reins to one of his companions. Mind if we talk inside? Archer hesitated, glancing toward Nora before nodding. This way, gentlemen. As they passed, Judge Halsey's gaze lingered on Nora, his eyes widening slightly at her scar before he quickly looked away. The familiar reaction stung, but less sharply than it once had. Alina appeared at Nora's side. That man, she muttered, is like a snake with legs. He wanted the ranch when Senor Morgan died, offered very little. When Archer came and paid the debts, the judge was very angry. What does he want now? Alina shrugged. Nothing good. Come, we will make coffee. Men like him always expect to be served. In the kitchen, they could hear raised voices from the main room, though the words were indistinct. After preparing coffee and a plate of Alina's fresh biscuits, Nora carried the tray into the room, where tension hung palpably in the air. Completely unreasonable, Judge Halsey was saying. The water rights alone are worth twice what Morgan paid. The railroad is coming, Whitfield. This land will be worth a fortune. Not for sale, Judge, not at any price. Archer's voice was level but firm. Halsey noticed Nora and forced a smile. Ah, refreshments, how thoughtful. His gaze skittered away from her face. And who might this lovely lady be? Mrs. Blackburn is my housekeeper, Archer said, with a note in his voice Nora couldn't quite identify. And a family connection through my uncle. Charmed, Halsey said insincerely, accepting a cup without looking at her directly. As Nora served the other men, she felt Archer's eyes on her, a silent apology in his gaze. She gave him a small smile, letting him know no apology was needed. "Your final answer is no, then?" Halsey pressed, returning to business. "Final," Archer confirmed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have cattle to tend to." The judge rose, abandoning his half-finished coffee. "You'll regret this, Whitfield. Nobody refuses me and prospers for long." After the unwelcome visitors departed, Nora found Archer on the porch, staring after them with a troubled expression. "Was that a threat?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Most definitely." He sighed, turning to face her. "Judge Halsey owns half the county and wants the rest. He's had his eye on this land for years. Alina said he tried to buy it when Jim died." Archer nodded. "For a fraction of its worth. The bank was ready to sell, debts and all. I got here just in time." He studied her for a moment. "I'm sorry about how they looked at you, or didn't look at you." "I'm used to it," she said with a slight shrug. "You shouldn't have to be." The quiet intensity in his voice surprised her. Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands called for Archer's attention from the corral, where a new horse was causing trouble. With an apologetic look, he left her standing on the porch, oddly unsettled by the exchange. That night at supper, Alina announced that her nephew was coming to work as a temporary hand while Miguel recovered. "Pedro is a good boy," she assured Archer. "Strong worker." "We need the help," Archer agreed. "When will he arrive?" "Tomorrow, perhaps the next day. He comes from Silver City." Nora stiffened at the name, her fork clattering against her plate. Both Alina and Archer looked at her with concern. "I'm sorry," she managed. "My husband and son. They were killed outside Silver City. Bandits." Alina made a sympathetic sound, crossing herself. "May God rest their souls." "Were the bandits caught?" Archer asked quietly. Nora shook her head. "The sheriff said they likely crossed into Arizona territory." There was nothing left to recover except Robert's watch and James's toy soldier. Her voice broke on her son's name. Without a word, Archer reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. For a long moment, they sat like that, connected by the simple human gesture of comfort. Later, Nora found herself unable to sleep, the memories of her family too close to the surface after mentioning them at dinner. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and slipped out to the porch, where the vast Nevada sky stretched overhead, ablaze with stars. "Couldn't sleep either." Nora startled at Archer's voice. He sat in a chair at the far end of the porch, a shadow among shadows. "I'm sorry. I didn't see you there." "No need for apologies." He stood, moving into a patch of moonlight. "Would you like me to leave you alone?" "No," she said, surprising herself with the quickness of her response. "I'd welcome the company, actually." They stood side by side at the railing, looking out at the silver-washed landscape. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. "How old was your son?" Archer asked finally. 6, Nora answered, her throat tight. "He had just lost his first tooth. He was so proud." Archer nodded, his profile strong in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, Nora, truly." "What about you?" she asked, needing to shift the focus away from her grief. "Have you ever been married?" "No," he said. "Came close once, back in Texas." "Elizabeth Carver. Her father owned the neighboring ranch." He paused. "She died in a fever outbreak 5 years ago now." "I'm sorry," Nora echoed his earlier words, meaning them. "Life goes on," he said simply. "Has to." They fell silent again, but something had shifted between them, a new understanding, a shared recognition of loss. "Your 2 weeks are nearly up," Archer observed after a while. "Have you decided if you'll stay?" The question hung in the air between them. Nora realized with some surprise that she hadn't thought about leaving for days. "I'd like to stay," she said softly. "If you'll have me." In the moonlight, she saw his smile, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Good," was all he said, but the single word carried a weight of approval that warmed her more than she cared to admit. The arrival of Alina's nephew Pedro, the next day, coincided with news that rustlers had struck a neighboring ranch. Archer called a meeting of all hands, issuing weapons and setting up a patrol schedule. "They're growing bolder," he told Nora that evening as she bandaged a cut on his hand sustained while repairing a fence. "Halsey claims the sheriff is doing all he can, but 3 raids in 2 weeks suggests otherwise." "You think the judge is involved?" Nora asked, tying off the bandage. Archer flexed his hand, testing her handiwork. "I can't prove anything, but the timing of his offer and the increase in rustling is suspicious. If enough ranchers get scared and sell out, he consolidates his power," Nora finished. "What will you do?" "Fight back," Archer said simply. "This land was important to Uncle Jim. It's important to me now." Nora found herself admiring his quiet determination. In the 2 weeks she'd known him, she'd come to respect his fairness with the ranch hands, his knowledge of the land, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. "You're staring, Mrs. Blackburn," he said, a hint of teasing in his voice. Nora flushed, realizing she'd been gazing at him longer than was proper. "Just making sure my bandaging will hold," she said primly, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "It'll hold," he assured her, his own smile warming his eyes. "You have capable hands." The compliment, simple as it was, stayed with her for days afterward. Summer heat settled over the ranch as June turned to July. Miguel returned to limited duties, his arm healing well under Alina's care. Nora found herself taking on more responsibilities, not just in the house, but occasionally helping with the garden and even the chickens. The physical work and fresh air brought color to her cheeks and filled out the gauntness grief had carved into her frame. One sweltering afternoon, Nora was returning from the springhouse with butter for supper when she heard the pounding of hooves. A rider was approaching at breakneck speed, his horse lathered and heaving. She recognized Pedro, who had been patrolling the north boundary. "Bandidos!" Pedro shouted as he reached the yard. "Many men coming this way. Senor Whitfield sent me to warn you. He and the others are trying to move the cattle to the south pasture." Nora's heart raced. How many men are they armed? At least 10, maybe more, all armed. Pedro dismounted, leading his exhausted horse toward the stable. "Senor says you and Tia Alina should hide in the cellar if they come here." From the distance came the sound of gunfire, several shots in quick succession. "Go find your aunt," Nora instructed, her mind racing. "Tell her to gather food and water. I'll get blankets." As Pedro ran toward the back cottage, Nora hurried inside, her thoughts in turmoil. The cellar would be safe, but if the raiders came to the house, hiding wouldn't protect the ranch. A memory flashed, her father teaching her to shoot his Remington when she was 16. "Just in case," he'd said. Making a decision, she rushed to Archer's bedroom. As she'd suspected, a gun cabinet stood against the wall. It was locked, but the key was in the top drawer of his desk. Inside the cabinet were several rifles and 2 revolvers. She selected a Winchester repeating rifle, checked that it was loaded, and took extra ammunition. By the time Alina and Pedro reached the house, Nora had gathered blankets, water, and the rifle. "Madre de Dios," Alina gasped, seeing the weapon. "You know how to use this." "My father taught me," Nora said with more confidence than she felt. "It's been years, but I remember the basics." The sound of gunfire was closer now. Through the window, they could see dust rising beyond the northern pasture riders approaching fast. "To the cellar," Nora directed. As they descended the steps into the cool darkness beneath the house, She positioned herself near the small window that faced the yard, just high enough to see through while remaining concealed. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited in tense silence. Finally, riders appeared, 5 men moving cautiously as they approached the main house. They weren't the ranch hands, and their manner made their intentions clear. "They think no one is here," Pedro whispered. "The others must still be at the north pasture." "Good," Nora murmured. "Let them think that." The leader, a tall man with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face, signaled for 2 men to check the barn while he and the others approached the house. Nora raised the rifle, steadying it against the window frame as her father had taught her. The first shot was meant as a warning, aimed at the ground near the leader's feet. The impact kicked up dust, startling the horses and sending the men diving for cover. "This property is defended," Nora called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Leave now, or the next shot won't miss." For answer, one of the men fired blindly toward the house, the bullet splintering wood well above the cellar window. Nora took careful aim and fired again, this time hitting a water barrel near the porch steps. Water gushed out, demonstrating her improved aim. "I won't warn you again," she shouted. A tense standoff followed. Nora could see the men conferring, clearly unwilling to risk a frontal assault on an unseen defender. Finally, the leader made a decision, gesturing for his men to retreat. "They're leaving," Pedro said incredulously. "No," Nora corrected, watching through the window. "They're splitting up. They'll try to circle around." Sure enough, 2 of the men disappeared around the side of the house, likely seeking another entrance. Nora repositioned herself at the cellar steps, aiming up toward the trapdoor that led into the kitchen. If they found it, they'd have to come down the steps, a perfect target. Minutes passed. Then, footsteps overhead, cautious at first, then more confident as they realized the house appeared empty. Nora heard low voices, the sound of drawers being opened. The trapdoor creaked. Nora raised her rifle. A sudden commotion erupted above shouts, the crash of furniture, a gunshot. Then silence. "Nora, Elena, Pedro," Archer's voice calling from the kitchen. "Here, in the cellar." Elena cried out in relief. The trapdoor swung open fully, revealing Archer's concerned face. "Are you all right?" "We're unharmed," Nora assured him, lowering the rifle as they emerged from the cellar. The kitchen was in disarray, with upended chairs and scattered utensils. In the main room, 2 of the raiders lay bound on the floor, sullenly silent under the watchful eye of Miguel and another ranch hand. "We heard the shots," Archer explained, his gaze lingering on Nora and the Winchester in her hands. "Managed to drive off most of them, but these 2 were already inside." "There were 5 altogether," Nora said. "I fired warning shots to keep them at bay." Archer's expression was a mixture of concern and admiration. "You could have been killed." "We couldn't just hide and let them destroy your home," she replied simply. Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth, an intensity that made her breath catch. Before he could respond, the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, summoned by one of the ranch hands during the confrontation. The next few hours were consumed with explanations, statements, and the removal of the prisoners. Sheriff Larson, a weathered man with a no-nonsense manner, seemed genuinely concerned about the escalating raids. "This is the 3rd attack in 2 weeks, he told Archer. "More aggressive than before. I've wired for additional deputies from Carson City." "About time," Archer said, his tone making it clear he thought the response was long overdue. As the sheriff prepared to leave, he paused beside Nora. "Mrs. Blackburn, right? Heard you were the one who held them off initially." His gaze was direct, showing no discomfort at her scar. "That took courage." "It was necessary," she said simply. The sheriff nodded approvingly before turning back to Archer. "You've got good people here, Whitfield, but keep your guard up. I don't think we've seen the last of this trouble." After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Alina insisted on preparing a hearty meal despite the disrupted kitchen. The ranch hands ate ravenously, the day's excitement having built formidable appetites. Throughout the meal, Nora was aware of Archer's gaze returning to her repeatedly, thoughtful and assessing. When the others had gone to their quarters, leaving them alone in the main room, he finally spoke. "That rifle. Where did you find it?" "In your cabinet," she admitted. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I thought we might need protection." "I'm not angry, Nora. I'm impressed." He moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Not many women or men, for that matter, would have had the presence of mind to do what you did today." "I was terrified," she confessed. "But I couldn't just hide and do nothing. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the face of it." He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "When I heard the shots and realized they were coming from the house, I thought I might lose you before I ever had the chance to." He broke off, seemingly at a loss for words, but his eyes conveyed what he couldn't articulate: concern, admiration, and something deeper, something that made Nora's heart beat faster. "To what?" she prompted softly. Instead of answering, he gently traced the line of her scar with his fingertips, a touch so tender it brought tears to her eyes. No one had willingly touched her face since the accident. "You're extraordinary, Nora Blackburn," he said quietly. "From the moment you arrived, standing so proudly despite everything you'd lost, I knew there was something special about you. Today only confirmed it." "Archer," she began, but the words caught in her throat. He lowered his hand, clearly misinterpreting her hesitation. "Forgive me. I've overstepped." "No," she said quickly, catching his hand in hers. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me and saw more than this." She gestured to her scarred face. "I see you, Nora," he said simply. "All of you." The truth of his words resonated in her soul. For the first time since the accident, she felt truly seen, not as a damaged woman to be pitied, but as a whole person worthy of respect and, perhaps, even affection. The realization was overwhelming. "I should retire," she said, needing time to process the tumult of emotions his words had stirred. "It's been a long day," he nodded, understanding in his eyes as he released her hand. "Rest well, Nora." In the privacy of her room, Nora stood before the small mirror on her dresser, really looking at herself for the first time in years. The scar was still there, a jagged line that disrupted the symmetry of her features. But it no longer seemed to define her. It was simply part of her face, part of her story. "I see you," Archer had said, and perhaps at long last she was beginning to see herself again too. The following weeks brought significant changes to Silverwater Ranch. Sheriff Larson increased patrols in the area, and the rustling incidents decreased. The two captured raiders, facing serious charges, began to talk, implicating others in what appeared to be an organized effort to drive small ranchers out of business. Judge Halsey, whose name had come up repeatedly in the prisoner's statements, left abruptly for San Francisco on urgent business, further fueling suspicions of his involvement. For Nora, the most profound changes were internal. The hollow ache of grief that had been her constant companion began to ease, not disappearing entirely, but becoming something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. In its place grew a tentative hope for the future, a future that increasingly included Archer Whitfield. Their relationship evolved gradually. An accidental touch while passing the salt at dinner. Conversations that stretched late into the evening, ranging from books they'd read to memories of their childhoods. The way his eyes sought hers across a room, as if checking that she was still there, still real. Lena observed these developments with quiet satisfaction, occasionally exchanging knowing glances with her husband Carlos. When Archer began finding reasons to include Nora in his daily rounds of the ranch, needing her opinion on which field would be best for the kitchen garden, asking if she thought the new foal was thriving, Alina merely smiled and found herself suddenly needed elsewhere. On a warm August evening, Archer invited Nora to ride with him to check on a pregnant mare in the south pasture. The sunset painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson as they rode side by side, comfortable in each other's company. The mare was doing well, peacefully grazing with the other horses. After ensuring all was in order, Archer suggested they dismount by a small stream where a stand of cottonwoods offered shade. "It's beautiful here," Nora remarked, settling on a fallen log while their horses drank from the stream. "This was Uncle Jim's favorite spot on the whole ranch," Archer said, sitting beside her. "He used to say the voice of the water told better stories than any book. He sounds like he was a wise man." He was. Archer plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "I wish you could have met him. He would have liked you." "I wish that too," Nora said softly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gentle burble of the stream and the rustle of leaves overhead. Finally, Archer turned to face her, his expression serious. "Nora, there's something I need to ask you," her heart quickened. "Yes, when you first came here, you were running from painful memories. You needed sanctuary, and I was glad to provide it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But now, I find myself hoping you might stay for entirely different reasons." "What reasons would those be?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because this place has become your home. Because the ranch hands respect you, Alina loves you like a daughter, and because—" He took her hand in his. "Because I've fallen in love with you, Nora Blackburn. Not out of pity or obligation, but because you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "People will talk. They'll say you settled for less, that you could have had any unmarked woman in the territory." "Let them talk," Archer said firmly. "They don't know you like I do. They don't see how your eyes light up when you laugh, or how gentle your hands are when you tend to an injured animal. They don't know how you held off armed raiders with nothing but courage and a borrowed rifle." A smile broke through her tears. "You make me sound like some kind of hero. You are to me." He reached up to trace her scar again, that same tender touch that acknowledged its presence without allowing it to diminish her. "This is part of you, part of your journey, but it's not who you are, Nora. It never was." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land that had become her sanctuary, Nora felt the final walls around her heart crumble. The grief was still there, as was the memory of Robert and James. They would always be part of her. But Archer wasn't asking her to forget or replace them. He was offering her a chance to add new love to her life, to build a future from the ashes of her past. "I love you too," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have for some time now." The joy that spread across his face was answer enough, but he sealed it with a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as she responded, her arms winding around his neck to draw him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Archer rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Nora. Be my partner in everything, this ranch, this life." "Yes," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. Yes. They were married in mid-September as the aspen leaves began to turn golden in the higher elevations. The ceremony was held at Silverwater Ranch, with Sheriff Larson officiating and the entire ranch staff in attendance. Alina had outdone herself with the preparations, transforming the main house with wildflowers and ribbons, and preparing a feast that would be talked about for months to come. Nora wore a new dress of deep blue, sewn by her own hands with material Archer had ordered specially from Sacramento. She wore her hair up but unadorned, and made no attempt to hide her scar. When Archer saw her, the look of absolute adoration in his eyes confirmed what she had gradually come to believe that to him. She was beautiful, whole, and complete exactly as she was. News of Judge Halsey's arrest in San Francisco reached them a week after the wedding. The charges included conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to multiple counts of cattle rustling. Sheriff Larson, delivering the news personally, seemed particularly satisfied. Seems the judge kept meticulous records of his illegal dealings, he informed them. Records that somehow found their way to the federal marshal's office. Very unfortunate for him. Archer's expression revealed nothing, but later, alone with Nora, he admitted his involvement. Uncle Jim suspected Halsey's corruption for years. He kept his own records, dates, transactions, names. I found them after his death, but needed more recent evidence before taking action. So while he was trying to pressure you into selling, you were building a case against him, Nora said, impressed by her husband's patience and strategic thinking. Justice moves slowly, but it gets there eventually, Archer replied with a small smile. As autumn deepened into winter, Silverwater Ranch settled into a peaceful routine. The success of their cattle sales allowed for improvements to the property, a new roof for the barn, expanded corrals, and plans for additional grazing land to the east. Nora found herself busier than ever, not just with household duties, but increasingly with the business aspects of the ranch. Her head for figures proved valuable when negotiating with cattle buyers, and Archer consulted her on every major decision affecting their future. It was early December, with the first dusting of snow covering the ground, when Nora confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. The morning sickness that had plagued her was not, as Alina had first suggested, the result of a mild stomach ailment. She told Archer that evening as they sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders in what had become their favorite way to end each day. A baby. He repeated, joy and wonder mingling in his voice. You're certain? As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation, she said, smiling at his expression. Alina says all the signs are there. The child should arrive by late spring. Archer placed his hand gently over her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. Our child, he said softly, part of you and part of me. Are you happy? She asked, though his radiant expression answered the question. Beyond words, he assured her, gathering her closer. When you first arrived here, you thought yourself broken beyond repair. I hope you know now how wrong that was, how whole and perfect you've always been. Nora nodded, leaning into his embrace. I do know that now, because you showed me, Archer. With every gentle touch, every time you looked at me and truly saw me, you helped me believe in myself again. You did the hard work, he insisted. I just reminded you of what was already there. As the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside their window, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The stagecoach accident that had scarred her face but not her spirit. The devastating loss of her husband and son that had nearly broken her completely. The desperate journey to find sanctuary that had led her, instead, to a new beginning. What are you thinking? Archer asked, noticing her contemplative mood. That sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, she replied. And that I'm grateful, despite everything, to be here with you, starting this new chapter together. He kissed her then, his touch as gentle and reverent as it had been the first time, a touch that said more clearly than words ever could that she was loved, wholly and completely, exactly as she was. Spring arrived at Silverwater Ranch with a burst of wildflowers and new life. The cattle herd had grown, with healthy calves dotting the green pastures. The ranch's reputation under Archer's management had spread throughout the territory, bringing offers of partnership from other ranchers that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. And in late April, as the cottonwood trees unfurled their leaves along the stream, Nora gave birth to their son Thomas James Whitfield, named for both Archer's father and Nora's lost child. The birth was long but uncomplicated, with Alina serving as midwife and Archer pacing anxiously until the baby's first lusty cry echoed through the house. When Archer first held his son, the look of wonder on his face brought fresh tears to Nora's eyes. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy blonde hair that already showed signs of darkening to his father's sandy brown. "Yes, he is," Nora agreed, exhausted but radiantly happy. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under the joint stewardship of his parents. By his first birthday, Silverwater had doubled in size through the purchase of neighboring properties that came available after Judge Halsey's conviction. Archer and Nora worked as true partners, their complementary strengths creating a business that became a model for the region. In the summer of Thomas's second year, they received a letter from the sheriff of Silver City. The bandits responsible for the deaths of Robert and James Blackburn had been captured after a failed bank robbery. The letter included a small package containing additional items recovered from the criminals' Robert's pocket watch that Nora had thought lost forever, and a small wooden box with James's baby curl that she had given her husband for safekeeping. The letter reopened wounds that had begun to heal, but also brought a measure of closure. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Archer found Nora on the porch, holding the recovered mementos and weeping quietly. Without a word, he sat beside her and pulled her into his arms, letting her tears flow. When the storm of grief subsided, he spoke softly. "They'll always be part of you, Nora, part of what made you the woman I love. I would never ask you to forget them." "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. "And I'm grateful every day for your understanding, for your love that made room for my past instead of asking me to erase it." They sat together in the gathering twilight, reminiscing about Robert's gentle humor and James's infectious laugh. Archer listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in the people who had been so important to his wife. "Thomas asked about my scar today," Nora said after a while, changing the subject. "He wanted to know if it hurt." Archer smiled. "What did you tell him?" "That it did once, but not anymore, and that it reminds me that I'm stronger than I thought I was." She leaned against his shoulder. He seemed to accept that. He's a wise boy, like his mother. Life at Silverwater continued to evolve. When Thomas was 3, he gained a sister, Alina Rose, named for the woman who had become like a mother to Nora. The following year brought another son, Michael Carlos, completing their family. As the children grew, the ranch expanded further. Archer's innovative breeding programs and Nora's financial acumen transformed Silverwater into one of the most successful operations in Nevada. They hired more hands, built a schoolhouse that served neighboring families as well as their own, and established a reputation for fair dealing that drew business from as far away as California. On the 10th anniversary of Nora's arrival at the ranch, Archer surprised her with a special gift, a silver hand mirror, exquisitely crafted and engraved with her initials. "A mirror?" she asked, puzzled by the seemingly ordinary present. "Look at the inscription on the back," he urged. Turning it over, she read the words engraved in flowing script. "To see yourself as I see you, beautiful, strong, and loved beyond measure." Tears filled her eyes as she met his gaze. "After all these years, you still find ways to surprise me." "I hope to keep surprising you for decades to come," he promised, drawing her into his arms. That night, with their children sleeping peacefully down the hall, Archer and Nora stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the ranch that had witnessed their journey from two wounded souls to a family bound by love and respect. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come here that day?" Archer asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they gazed at the star-filled Nevada sky. "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "But then, I remember what you told me once, that a scar is just evidence that you were stronger than whatever tried to kill you." She turned in his embrace to face him. "My scars brought me here, to you and this life we've built. I wouldn't trade that for anything." "Nor would I," he said softly, bending to kiss her with the same gentle reverence that had first helped her believe in the possibility of love again. "Nor would I." And as the silver moonlight bathed the land they had nurtured together, Nora Blackburn Whitfield, once thought too broken to love, knew with absolute certainty that some wounds heal stronger than they were before. That sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest hurts. And that, with the right person, even the most damaged heart could find its way home,